Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Tuesday everybody. Today's video is coming to you from Narita International Airport in Tokyo, Japan. I originally said that there would be no episode because there would not be time to film it because I'm flying, but there has been so much that has happened over the last 24 to 48 hours that I just had to put up a video. This is being filmed, like I said, from the international airport, so there is a lot of background noise. My apologies for this distraction. Hopefully you should still be able to hear most of what I say throughout the video. I normally would never try to release a video being filmed in this sort of environment, but like I said, there's just too much to cover. I'm going to record today's episode and upload it before I jump on a flight to New Zealand to go and see my family after a very long time since I last saw them. Once again, my apologies for the audio equipment. Let's push forward with today's episode. Before we move into the main stories, we note, sadly, that on Sunday morning, a fire at a coal mine in southwestern China's Guizhou province has killed 16 people. Local state media reports that the mine had been penalized several times since 2018 for safety violations. Yesterday, Monday, the Ministry of Emergency Management announced that the State Council's Work Safety Committee is investigating the event. Back in February, an open-pit mine collapsed in Inner Mongolia, resulting in 53 people dead. First up for the main stories today, we move through several developments related to US-China relations. Yesterday, Monday, the US Treasury Department and the PRC Ministry of Finance announced the establishment of 2 new working groups between the two sides, an economic working group and a financial working group. In its official statement, the US Treasury expressed that, quote, the formation of these working groups builds on the consensus reached between Secretary Yellen and Vice Premier He during the Secretary's trip to Beijing in July, and carries out President Biden's directive to deepen communication between the two countries following his meeting with President Xi in Bali last year. PRC state-run CCTV, perhaps constrained by the expectations of its domestic audience, was a little mixed in its signals to the US in reacting to this news, writing, quote, the establishment of the 2 working groups serves as a platform for China to continue to negotiate and struggle with the US on these issues. End quote. In another sign of cooperation, the U.S. Department of Defense announced that this week U.S. defense officials held a hybrid in-person and virtual meeting with People's Republic of China defense officials at the invitation of the Department of Defense to discuss its recently released cyber strategy summary. Following the briefing, the official statement reads, quote, the 2 sides engaged in substantive discussion on a range of cyber-related topics. End quote. Also on Monday, the U.S. Commerce Department added a total of 28 firms to a trade blacklist, making it harder for U.S. suppliers to ship technology to them. Several of these are Chinese firms, including Asia Pacific Links Limited, which the Commerce Department alleges is providing Moscow with military aid. Meanwhile, regular viewers will remember that several weeks ago we covered U.S. Ambassador to Japan, Rahm Emanuel, making the unusual move for a diplomat of engaging in highly critical attacks on China generally and Xi Jinping specifically. This has been done through tweets and with several interviews in both US and Japanese media. Comments included, quote, look, would like to have a good relationship, but if they keep lying and cheating, then you would be a fool to go into the discussion with them not knowing what they're doing, end quote, in his Wall Street Journal interview. And, quote, one cannot help but wonder how different the global health landscape would be and how many lives would have been saved if China had engaged in even a fraction of the due diligence, openness and international cooperation that Japan has in managing Fukushima, end quote, in his interview with Nikkei. Like I said, for a US diplomat, this is unusually critical language. The US-based outlet NBC reported last week, officials with the National Security Council at the White House told Emanuel's staff that his comments, quote, risk undermining the administration's efforts to mend deeply strained relations with China, including with a possible meeting this fall between Biden and Xi, end quote. One unnamed White House official reportedly told the outlet that Emanuel's tweets are, quote, not in keeping with the message coming out of this building, end quote, with another expressing, quote, these comments make no sense and does not advance US strategic goals with China or with the Asia-Pacific region. It just fights what we are doing there in the region, end quote. Adding, quote, the US needs to maintain some relationship with China, especially an economic one, and social media postings like Emmanuel's do not further US goals." End quote. Despite this report, however, Emmanuel appears to be maintaining his critical stance as he had before. On Friday of last week, for example, the ambassador posted pictures of Chinese boats fishing near Japan despite a seafood ban, and noted China's defense minister was still missing, expressing, quote, "Economic coercion by China is their most persistent and pernicious tool in their toolbox." End quote. We also note that in recent days, White House Indo-Pacific Coordinator Kurt Campbell described Emmanuel as a superstar and an effective US representative, quote, "serving with distinction," end quote, suggesting that the NBC report that Emmanuel had been gagged may be premature. Now, since we brought up his tweet about Chinese boats fishing near Japan, we should touch on this development briefly too. Japan-based the Asahi Shimbun reports that despite the Chinese government imposing a blanket ban on Japanese seafood imports in response to the Fukushima-treated radioactive water release, quote, "fish caught in the same part of the Pacific Ocean by Chinese vessels are apparently A-OK as domestic products." Although China made a huge fuss when the discharge of treated water from the Fukushima plant began on August 24th, the number of Chinese vessels remained roughly the same from August 3rd to September 19th, ranging between 146 and 167 a day, according to Global Fishing Watch data. End quote. Beijing banned the Japanese imports to, quote, "protect food security and public health," end quote. Due to the ban, imports from Japan of seafood fell by 67% in August year-on-year, inflicting tens of millions of dollars of damage on Japanese businesses in the industry. Quote, "So to where will these ships sell their catch? And if the catch is too dangerous for PRC customers because of alleged possible contamination, why is it okay for PRC fishing companies to sell it to other countries?" End quote. Next up, Huawei's launch event and the housing crisis. If you're enjoying the special broadcast coming to you from Narita Airport in Japan, and you don't mind the background noise too much, again, my apologies for that. Don't forget to hit the like button. Liking, sharing, and subscribing are all huge helps for the channel. And for anyone who can go the extra mile and help me keep China Update financially sustainable, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. Once again, my apologies for the background noise, but I hope you're getting some value from this episode. Like I said, there were too many important developments that we just simply could not skip a day. Let's push on with the rest of today's episode. Yesterday, Monday, Shenzhen-based Chinese telecommunications giant Huawei held its product event at a stadium watched by millions online. Interestingly, the company disappointed by not giving many details on its new flagship smartphones, which had been hailed by Chinese state media as a sign that the firm had overcome US sanctions and has caused waves in Washington, with lawmakers asking the same thing. Also, curiously, the company is not calling the new Mate 60 Pro a 5G phone, even though it is. Several commentators argue that Huawei may be trying to obscure the tech that went into the phone out of concern that companies that obtained US export licenses for non-5G related sales to Huawei may be hit with new restrictions from Washington. At the product event, the company announced that it has ended its long-standing partnership with Porsche Design. It also showed off its flagship Mate Pad tablet and new smartwatches, doing an onstage benchmarking of the Mate Pad Pro against Apple's iPad Pro. According to analysts at TF International Securities, demand for the Mate 60 Pro in China is strong, with shipments of the Mate 60 Pro expected to reach at least 12 million units within 12 months of launch. Indeed, Japanese-based financial media outlet Nikkei Asia reports that the company is struggling to meet the surging demand from its latest Mate 60 Pro, Mate X5, and Mate 60 models. Huawei also boasted that its so-called Harmony OS operating system now has approximately 600 million users, making it the third most popular in the world. The company's executive director and CEO of its customer business said on Monday that about 1.2 million new users are added every day. In an interview, Huawei founder Ren Zhengfei, perhaps ignorant of the tale of Icarus, boasted, quote, "If China establishes its own standards for operating systems, it will definitely be better than that of the United States," end quote. And we end today's rather background noisy video with several salient developments related to the ongoing housing crisis. Chinese financial media outlet Yicai reports that multiple current and former executives of China Evergrande Group and its subsidiaries have been swept up by investigations. Quote, as authorities look at whether the embattled conglomerate has violated rules over how funds can be used. End quote. One ex-CEO of the group and a former chief financial officer have both been detained by Chinese mainland authorities, according to unnamed sources. Quote, both were in charge of the property giant's financial operations and resigned in July last year for their alleged involvement in a bank deposit scandal. End quote. A Bloomberg intelligence gauge of developer shares fell 7.1% on Monday, taking its loss in valuation this year to almost $56 billion. Evergrande, the US outlet writes, quote, which scrapped key creditor meetings at the last minute and said it must revisit its restructuring plan, dived 22%. End quote. China Huawei Group Limited was the biggest drag on the index, collapsing by a record 72% after shares resumed trading following an 18-month hold. Yesterday, Wang Jie, head of the financing department at a major Chinese real estate company, published an opinion piece on China's housing market with Chinese financial media outlet Caixin. In the piece, Wang writes that Guangzhou's recent relaxation of restrictions, which we covered last week, indicates it is floating test balloons to gauge the reaction of the market and the central authorities. Quote, this loosening also underscores the dire situation of Guangzhou's real estate market. End quote. Wang continues, quote, it's likely that fellow Guangdong province metropolis Shenzhen will soon follow suit. Shenzhen desperately needs a remedy for the slump in its housing prices that came in the wake of 2020's property boom. End quote. However, Wang argues that the megacities of Beijing and Shanghai are likely to hold off loosening similar restrictions. Quote, after all, if these two cities were to scrap their restrictions, the potential suction effect could draw in real estate investment from across the country, including some money that would have been spent in second and third tier cities, precipitating a plunge in home prices in smaller cities. Another possibility is that Beijing and Shanghai's scrapping of restrictions might fail to spur any interest from buyers, setting off a collapse in home prices across the country. End quote. And on this topic, let us end today's video with this observation made by a former deputy head of Beijing's Statistics Bureau at a recent forum in southern China, published by state-run China News Service. The comments are fairly incredible, and it takes a few moments before one can really appreciate just how disquieting they are. Quote, how many vacant homes are there now? Each expert gives a very different number, with the most extreme believing the current number of vacant homes are enough for 3 billion people. That estimate might be a bit much, but 1.4 billion people probably can't fill them. End quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update, coming to you from Narita Airport in Japan. Next time it will be a much more quiet background. My apologies once again for the distractions. Thank you for listening to today's video. Have a wonderful Tuesday, and I will see you all tomorrow.